So talk about the piece from 2024, and maybe start with the Leviticus passages.
Well, in 2024, I wrote a piece called Sex and the Christian Nationalists. And I think Lisa Senecal and I did a show on it very early, before this was Unholy Ground, before I was doing this with you. So I don't know how many people saw it, but it was very much tied to how they believe they have the right to even come into our bedrooms and regulate what we're doing in our most private spaces and lives. We've talked a lot here about Genesis and the origin of the Genesis dominion in Genesis 1:26 through 28. But we haven't really talked about how the Dominionist movement has tied that to this passage in Leviticus 18:24 through 29, where angry, vengeful Old Testament God, which is who white Christian nationalists worship, is telling the Israelites, which, they weren't Christians. There wasn't such a thing as Christianity way back then in Leviticus. But, anyway, is telling the Israelites that they have to police what people are doing in their cities. That if one couple out of 100,000 people in a city are committing adultery, then God, angry, vengeful Old Testament God, will judge the whole city until the rest of them make those two stop committing adultery and provide the biblical punishment, which was being publicly stoned to death, for those two people. So that's the part that Lisa and I talked about. But the other part of that passage that I never really covered was the specific admonition that it applies to everybody who lives in the city, whether or not they're Israelites, even if they're foreign, even if they don't follow angry, vengeful Old Testament God, even if they've never heard of Leviticus. They are also required to live this way. And the Israelites have the right, according to vengeful, angry Old Testament God, to go into their homes and say, you can't do these things either, because of this passage in Leviticus that vengeful, angry Old Testament God that we believe in and you don't, said you have to follow too. So that passage in Leviticus 18:24 through 29, I think the specific verse is 26, where it says foreign born have to follow this, is how these dominionists, and it really doesn't matter what flavor you are, have tied these concepts together to give themselves the right to come into all of our spaces, whatever we believe or don't believe, and say, we get to tell you what to do. It's very convenient for someone like Peter Thiel to have all these people who believe that they can take a faith document and their specific interpretation of it and say, Sam, you have to live this way all the time, even in your most private moments, or we're going to discipline you. It's very convenient for someone like him, for these billionaires who believe that they have the right to surveil us 24/7, to have millions of brainwashed people who also believe that their Bibles give them the right to do that.
So this is, to me, it sounds like a sort of 1-2 punch of white Christian nationalism, right? It's the first step, or the left. Is it the left in a 1-2 first, and then I don't know. Maybe it's the weak, and then anyway. Dominionism is this idea that God has given man, and I say that purposefully, man, control over all of the earth and all of the things and every land and all of this. It is ours to do, not to care for necessarily, but to do whatever the hell we want to with, right? But then the second piece of that is we have control. This is ours, belongs to us. And there's a very narrow framework of morality that we must apply to everyone. And we have control. This is the system of ethics and morality that we that everyone has to follow, and therefore it is not just our right but our responsibility to make sure that everyone in every city follows this code, right?